How did a 20-year-old king from a small kingdom conquer the greatest empire on earth in just over a decade? It sounds like the beginning of a legend. Yet this was no myth. It was the astonishing reality of a young ruler from Macedon whose ambition reshaped the ancient world forever. Within only 13 years, he would march more than 20,000 miles across mountains, deserts, and rivers. He would defeat armies that often outnumbered his own, overthrow the mighty Persian Empire, the greatest superpower of its age, and establish an empire stretching from Greece to the borders of India. Cities would fall before him, kings would surrender, and soldiers would follow him into lands no Greek had ever seen. But his story is more than a tale of conquest. It is a story of impossible battles won against overwhelming odds, of brilliant military tactics that are still studied today, of loyalty and ambition pushed to their limits, and of a mysterious death that came just as it seemed there were no worlds left to conquer. His empire would fracture almost immediately after his passing, yet his influence would transform civilizations, spread Greek culture across 3 continents, and leave a legacy that still shapes history more than 2,000 years later. This is the incredible true story of Alexander the Great. Chapter 1, The Prince of Macedon. Alexander was born in 356 BC in the royal capital of Pella, the heart of the kingdom of Macedon. At the time, Macedon stood on the edge of the Greek world. Many of the southern Greek city-states viewed its people as rough and uncivilized, but that perception was rapidly changing under the leadership of Alexander's father, King Philip II. Philip was not only a skilled warrior but one of history's greatest military reformers. He transformed the Macedonian army into a disciplined fighting force, introducing the formidable phalanx armed with the long sarissa spear and creating an elite companion cavalry capable of devastating charges. Long before Alexander fought his first battle, his father had already built the military machine that would make future conquests possible. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was equally influential. Fiercely intelligent and deeply religious, she convinced her son from an early age that he was destined for greatness. Stories of heroes such as Achilles filled his childhood, inspiring an ambition that would never leave him. Recognizing his son's extraordinary potential, Philip appointed one of the greatest minds of the ancient world to educate the young prince, Aristotle. Under his guidance, Alexander studied philosophy, medicine, science, literature, and geography. More importantly, he developed an endless curiosity about the world beyond Greece, a curiosity that would later drive him farther than any conqueror before him. Legend tells of another defining moment during his youth. When a magnificent but uncontrollable horse was brought before the royal court, every rider failed to tame it. Alexander noticed that the frightened animal was startled by its own shadow. Turning the horse toward the sun, he calmly mounted it and rode away as the crowd watched in disbelief. The horse, Bucephalus, would remain his loyal companion through nearly every campaign until its death many years later. Alexander's education was matched by real battlefield experience. At just 18 years old, he commanded part of the Macedonian army at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. There, fighting alongside his father, he helped crush the combined forces of Athens and Thebes, securing Macedonian dominance over Greece. It was the first glimpse of the commander he would become. But fate intervened only 2 years later. In 336 BC, during a royal celebration, King Philip II was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. The motive remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Overnight, 20-year-old Alexander inherited a powerful kingdom surrounded by rivals who believed the young king would be easy to overthrow. They could not have been more mistaken. Chapter 2, Conquering Greece. The news of Philip's death spread quickly across the Greek world. Many cities believed Macedonian power had died with its king. Athens celebrated. Thebes openly revolted. Tribes along Macedonia's northern frontier prepared to invade, convinced that the young monarch lacked the experience to hold his father's empire together. Alexander responded with astonishing speed. Rather than waiting for his enemies to unite, he launched a series of lightning campaigns. First, he marched north through the rugged Balkan mountains, defeating rebellious tribes and securing Macedonia's borders. Before the Greeks could even react, he turned south, covering hundreds of miles in just a matter of weeks. When Alexander's army appeared outside the walls of Thebes, many could hardly believe the reports. The city had expected months to prepare for war. Instead, the Macedonian king stood at its gates almost without warning. Alexander offered generous terms if the rebels surrendered peacefully. They refused. The battle that followed was swift and devastating. Macedonian troops breached the city's defenses, and fierce street fighting erupted through Thebes. By the time the fighting ended, the once powerful city had been almost completely destroyed. Thousands were killed, thousands more were sold into slavery, and nearly every building was reduced to rubble. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared as a gesture of respect. The destruction of Thebes shocked the Greek world. It was a brutal message that rebellion would not be tolerated. One by one, the remaining city-states abandoned thoughts of resistance and reaffirmed their loyalty to the League of Corinth, recognizing Alexander as commander of the united Greek forces. With Greece finally secure, Alexander turned his attention eastward. For generations, the Persian Empire had intervened in Greek affairs, financed rival city-states, and launched invasions that threatened the survival of Greek civilization itself. His father had planned an invasion of Persia but never lived to see it begin. Alexander now embraced that unfinished mission, but his ambitions would soon grow far beyond revenge. In the spring of 334 BC, with around 40,000 soldiers and little more than confidence in his army and himself, Alexander crossed the narrow waters of the Hellespont into Asia. Ahead lay the richest empire on earth. And the greatest campaign in military history was about to begin. Chapter 3, The Fall of Persia. As Alexander stepped onto the shores of Asia Minor, he is said to have thrust his spear into the ground, symbolically claiming the continent by right of conquest. It was a bold declaration, but one that seemed almost impossible to fulfill. Before him stood the vast Persian Empire, stretching from the Aegean Sea to Central Asia and ruled by King Darius III, whose resources dwarfed those of Macedon. The first test came at the Battle of the Granicus River. Persian commanders positioned their cavalry along the riverbank, believing the rushing water would break the Macedonian attack before it even reached the opposite shore. Instead, Alexander did the unthinkable. Leading the assault personally, he charged straight into the river with his companion cavalry. Amid the chaos, he narrowly escaped death when a Persian nobleman struck his helmet with a sword. Only the quick intervention of one of his officers saved his life. The Persian line collapsed, and Asia Minor began to fall city by city. The following year, Alexander met Darius III himself at the Battle of Issus. Although vastly outnumbered, Alexander used the narrow terrain to neutralize the Persian advantage. At the decisive moment, he led a thunderous cavalry charge directly toward Darius. Seeing the Macedonian king racing toward him, the Persian ruler lost his nerve and fled the battlefield. His army dissolved into panic, leaving behind his royal camp, and even members of his own family. Yet Alexander's path to Persia's heartland was far from open. The wealthy island city of Tyre refused to surrender. Protected by towering walls rising directly from the sea, it was considered nearly impossible to capture. Alexander answered with extraordinary determination. He ordered his engineers to construct a massive stone causeway stretching from the mainland to the island while siege towers and warships battered the defenses. After 7 grueling months, Macedonian forces finally broke through. The fall of Tyre sent a powerful message across the eastern Mediterranean: no fortress was beyond Alexander's reach. With the coast secured, he marched into Egypt, where he was welcomed not as a conqueror but as a liberator from Persian rule. At Memphis, Egyptian priests crowned him as pharaoh, and during a journey across the desert to the oracle of Ammonius at Siwa, he received a prophecy that strengthened his belief in a divine destiny. On the Mediterranean coast, Alexander founded a new city that would bear his name, Alexandria. Carefully planned with broad streets and an excellent harbor, it would grow into one of the greatest centers of learning, trade, and culture in the ancient world. But Alexander's greatest challenge still awaited him. Darius III had survived. Deep within Mesopotamia, he was assembling a new army unlike any the ancient world had ever seen. The final struggle for the Persian Empire was about to begin. Chapter 4, Gaugamela, the battle that changed history. In the autumn of 331 BC, the two greatest armies of the ancient world finally moved toward one another on the vast plains near the village of Gaugamela. Darius III had learned from his previous defeats. This time, he carefully chose open ground where his enormous army could fully deploy. Ancient sources claim he commanded hundreds of thousands of soldiers, though modern historians believe the true number was likely much smaller. Even so, the Persians still outnumbered Alexander by a wide margin. They fielded cavalry from across the empire, thousands of infantry, deadly scythed chariots designed to tear through enemy formations, and even a small force of war elephants, animals unlike anything most Macedonian soldiers had ever faced. Alexander knew a direct assault would be suicide. Instead, he relied on discipline, flexibility, and deception. As the battle began, he deliberately moved his army diagonally across the plain, drawing the Persian cavalry away from the center and forcing Darius to stretch his battle line. The Persian king took the bait, ordering his forces to pursue. Suddenly, the opportunity Alexander had been waiting for appeared. Leading the elite companion cavalry, he formed a wedge-shaped attack and charged directly through the widening gap in the Persian line. The Macedonian cavalry smashed into the enemy with overwhelming force, driving straight toward Darius himself. Around them, the battle descended into chaos. Scythed chariots thundered toward the Macedonian phalanx, but disciplined soldiers calmly opened lanes to let them pass before striking the horses and crews from both sides. The Persian plan was unraveling. As Alexander's cavalry drew closer, Darius faced the same terrifying choice he had confronted at Issus. Fight, or flee. For the second time, the Persian king turned his chariot and escaped the battlefield. Seeing their ruler abandon them, Persian morale collapsed. What had begun as one of history's greatest armies dissolved into a desperate retreat. The victory at Gaugamela changed the course of history. Alexander marched triumphantly into Babylon, where its magnificent walls, temples, and hanging gardens symbolized the wealth of an empire now under his control. From there, he advanced to Susa, capturing vast royal treasuries that funded the next stage of his campaign. His final destination was Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian kings. There, amid towering palaces and grand halls built by generations of Achaemenid rulers, Alexander stood as the undisputed master of the Persian Empire. Months later, much of the palace complex was consumed by fire, whether as deliberate revenge for Persia's invasion of Greece a century earlier or as the result of a drunken celebration remains a subject of historical debate. One thing, however, was beyond dispute. The Persian Empire had fallen. But for Alexander, conquering the greatest empire on earth was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. Chapter 5, The Edge of the World. With the Persian Empire defeated, many believed Alexander had achieved everything a conqueror could dream of. His generals expected the long campaign to end, and his soldiers hoped they would soon return home after years of relentless marching. Alexander had other plans. Driven by an insatiable desire to explore and conquer, he pushed farther east into the rugged mountains and deserts of Central Asia. The campaign proved far more difficult than the battles against Persia. Instead of facing massive armies in open fields, the Macedonians fought elusive warriors who relied on ambushes, swift cavalry raids, and their knowledge of the unforgiving terrain. The fighting dragged on for years, testing the endurance and loyalty of Alexander's army like never before. During this campaign, Alexander married Roxana, the daughter of a Bactrian nobleman. The marriage was both a political alliance and, according to several ancient sources, one of genuine affection. It also reflected Alexander's growing vision of uniting the peoples of his expanding empire rather than simply ruling them through force. In 326 BC, Alexander crossed the mighty Indus River and entered the Indian subcontinent. There, he encountered one of his most formidable opponents, King Porus. The two armies met at the Battle of the Hydaspes River during a violent monsoon. Heavy rain turned the battlefield into thick mud, while the swollen river seemed impossible to cross. Using one of his favorite tactics, Alexander secretly moved part of his army upstream under cover of darkness and crossed at an unexpected location, catching Porus by surprise. The battle that followed introduced the Macedonians to a terrifying new weapon, war elephants. Towering above the battlefield, they charged into the phalanx, scattering soldiers and causing chaos. Yet Alexander's disciplined troops held their formation, surrounded the elephants, and gradually wore down Porus's forces in one of the hardest-fought victories of his career. Impressed by Porus's courage, Alexander asked the defeated king how he wished to be treated. Like a king, Porus famously replied. Respecting his bravery, Alexander restored Porus to his throne and even granted him additional territory, demonstrating that mercy could sometimes achieve more than fear. But by now, Alexander's army had reached its limit. After nearly a decade of constant warfare and thousands of miles from home, his exhausted soldiers refused to march farther east. Beyond the next rivers, they were told, lay even greater kingdoms with armies larger than any they had yet faced. Despite Alexander's passionate pleas, the men stood firm. For the first time in his career, Alexander was forced to surrender, not to an enemy, but to the will of his own army. Reluctantly, he turned back toward Babylon, unaware that the greatest battle of his life was no longer waiting on a distant frontier. It was waiting for him at home. Chapter 6, Death and Legacy. In the spring of 323 BC, Alexander returned to Babylon, the magnificent city he envisioned as the capital of a new world empire. At just 32 years old, he was already the ruler of lands stretching from Greece and Egypt to the mountains of Central Asia and the fringes of India. Yet even after years of relentless conquest, his ambitions remained as vast as ever. Plans were already being discussed for new campaigns into Arabia, expanded trade routes, and the further unification of his empire. Those plans would never become reality. Shortly after attending a banquet, Alexander was struck by a sudden illness. Ancient accounts describe days of worsening fever and weakness. Gradually, the king who had led countless charges at the front of his army lost the strength even to speak. His soldiers filed silently past his bed, and although he could no longer address them, many believed he acknowledged them with a final glance. The exact cause of his death remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Some historians suggest malaria or typhoid fever. Others point to diseases such as West Nile virus or complications from old battle wounds. The popular theory that Alexander was poisoned has fascinated generations, but most modern scholars consider it unlikely based on the available evidence. When Alexander died in June 323 BC, he left behind an empire unlike any the world had ever seen, but he left no clear adult heir to rule it. Almost immediately, his most trusted generals began competing for power. Over decades of conflict, the empire fragmented into rival kingdoms ruled by former commanders. Egypt fell under the Ptolemaic dynasty, while the Seleucid Empire dominated much of Asia. Although Alexander's unified empire vanished, the world he had created endured. His conquest sparked the Hellenistic Age, a remarkable period during which Greek language, art, philosophy, science, and architecture spread across 3 continents, blending with the cultures of Egypt, Persia, and the Near East. Cities such as Alexandria became centers of learning where scholars preserved ancient knowledge, advanced mathematics and astronomy, and laid foundations that would influence civilizations for centuries. Alexander's military genius also left an enduring mark. His bold use of speed, surprise, combined arms, and decisive cavalry attacks has been studied by commanders from Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte to modern military academies. More than victories alone, it was his ability to inspire extraordinary loyalty and seize opportunities in the chaos of battle that secured his place among history's greatest leaders. More than 2,000 years have passed since Alexander the Great rode across the battlefields of the ancient world. Empires have risen and fallen. Kingdoms have disappeared. Borders have been redrawn countless times. But one name has never faded. More than 2,000 years later, countless empires have disappeared, but one name still echoes through history: Alexander the Great.